So as I work in the Green Movement, sometimes my work has taken me to the heart of the European Union in Brussels. And the first time I went there, I had planned these meetings with all these very important members of the parliament and other officials who are very important and doing important stuff. But I was kind of figuring that they're not going to tell me anything interesting. They're just going to tell me how, yes, what I say is very important, but they can't do anything, even though they are the people doing the decisions. But I had seen online on YouTube some other guy from the Brussels corridors of officials, and what he was saying was very interesting. It kind of matches with what we saw in the first evening in the movie, where the United Nations guy said that nature is telling us stop. And John was also in one video saying the solution is to stop doing stuff. It's very simple. So I wanted to meet up with him and ask, like, how do people take this message of stop doing stuff? Very simple, but at the same time very complex. And I wrote to him, and he said, "Yeah, come over," with no questions asked. So I went there. I secretly had my Degrowth shirt on, the one you have seen already, but it didn't show it because I didn't know who this guy really is. But like in 10 minutes, we already realized that we're actually kind of on the same page. Yeah, and why I have him here today is that I think it's a good, very realistic picture or one possible view of the world or the state that we are in. So we've heard some very positive, optimistic outlook. Today we also heard some like notes of worry or pessimism, and now we'll see what John has to say. And so you know, in some events his name is John Doom Doyle. So let's see how doomy or gloomy the thing is today. But in the end of the interview, I hope we arrive to this the possible future as well, because I remember this future that you always say out, and the young kids are very happy about it, and the adults are horrified. So we will hopefully get there. And since John is Irish, you might have some trouble with his accent, but I hope not. I hope he will be very slow and guide us slowly through this thing. But my first question really is that, even though you're representing yourself today, what is it that you do in the European Commission?
Okay, so first and foremost, Matt is a great guy, and I really appreciate being asked. I'll try and speak slowly. The English language has never been able to quite capture the speed with which Irish people really want to express themselves. So if I speak too quickly, tell me. I work in the Directorate General called Connect, and that is the Directorate General that looks after research and IT and looks after telecommunications legislation and so on and so forth. But I have a second life as kind of being one of the primary Foresight experts. So I spend a lot of time working with Foresight groups, or I used to spend a lot of time working with Foresight groups. I've rethought that since the pandemic, and maybe I'll go into that in a little while. So technically speaking, I say for this intervention, I'm speaking just as John Doyle, just so you know that I work in the European Commission. I've been here for over 20 years, know a lot of stuff, know a lot of foresight. I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm pretty good with figures and technical stuff, particularly good envisaging systems and so on and so forth.
So you're predicting the future in a way, or at least mapping out possible futures.
I always prefer to say that my version of foresight is trying to gain insight into the present. The vast majority of people, when they say the kind of, oh, I'm interested in the future, like everybody has the same future. Robots are doing everything. We're free to do everything we want to do. And somebody has come up with levitating cars and so on and so forth. I always insist that foresight is about predicting the present, which might sound a little bit bizarre, but climate-wise, the present is unfolding in the present, or what you might have thought was the future, or what the IPCC would suggest was the future, or talked about being the future in 100 years' time. All of this is happening now.
You can move it a bit back up the microphone. But
oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, the future that people were predicting 5 years ago for 100 years is happening today. We have wet bulb temperatures in Vancouver. We have in Bangladesh. So we have terrifying things unfolding right now. So I don't. I like to think in terms of foresight being more like insight or clairvoyance, seeing what is. Yeah.
And that is that like an official part in the Brussels machine, or is this just something that some officials are doing just for fun?
It was very radical when it was fringe, like most things, but now we actually have a commissioner who has part of his remit is foresight. So people are technically meant to consider the future at all points in all policy. But once something has been brought fully into the mainstream, it's terribly difficult for it to remain radical or different. So once it has become compartmentalized and siloed and subject to overall policy orientations, then it becomes part of the machine. I always find that the insights you get are the insights from specific people. Systems don't particularly help. I think you need you click with specific people, and they might be, it might be the guy on the help desk making something work, or it might be a very senior official. But it's more about people than systems for me, anyway.
Yeah, because when we met you very quickly, you gave me this pack of papers, which was the limited list, which is, as I understood, was just your handpick of different people who you just were sending these emails, and these were like super radical emails about, well, we're actually over 3 degrees of warming or something like this. And that's like that's what happens in the corridors. And then I remember you had this tool for the normal officials who are doing the normal work and policy work. And this tool was about showing what do you have to actually do to get these emissions reductions that we're all talking about, and net zero. And I remember that the officials were not really happy with this tool, because all the time the tool showed that you had to do a lot, or basically it's impossible. Is it better now somehow, or
no? It's infinitely worse. When we met first, I was animating this big group. So we had 300, 400 officials inside the commission. Pretty radical emails. I'm in close contact with people like Robert Hunsaker in the States, or Roger Hallam from Extinction Rebellion. I know very, very many of the best climate scientists and some of the most radical thinkers around, and I've worked with them on the side for very many years, and that was the sort of data or information that I was channeling to this limited list of people, because a lot of people said, I don't want to be on this list. I don't want to hear this crap. Please get this away from me, I was about 3 weeks into the pandemic when I was writing one of these limited list emails, and it had suddenly struck me that nature was doing for us all the things that we claimed we should do. So it was reducing emissions by 7%, it was stopping us traveling, it was reducing trade, it was doing all these things. And I had a sudden insight that things were going to unfold as they were going to unfold, and this would have very little to do with talking or writing. And just as I said, very little to do with talking or writing. So why am I talking and writing? So I just kind of stopped. I said, that's the end of the limited list. Right there. Just said, okay, it's over.
It was a sad day.
Well, yeah, kind of. But I knew I was right to stop, but I didn't know why. And so one of the things that I would highly recommend that this group do as your next group exercise is to take a film recently finished by a Hungarian-Canadian psychologist who specializes in addiction, a guy called Gabor Maté. And they have just released, I see somebody's heard of Gabor Mate. and Gabor Mate is, this is an extraordinary movie about trauma. And I've been working through a lot myself, thinking about, you know, my own upbringing as an Irish male. I was born in 1960. And what my mental state or preparedness is or could be for the challenges we're facing. And literally in the last 2 weeks, I've suddenly realized that most of the work that I have done with the limited list, or kind of showing people how obvious it is that if you add 2 degrees to 2 degrees, it's 4 degrees is extinction, etc. Most of this was the behavior of a very poor teacher shouting at a deaf student. Because people who are deeply traumatized, as is my opinion, certainly for all the decision makers that we see in Western Europe, I'm of the opinion that these people are so deeply traumatized by the paths they have taken to arrive where they have arrived, that they are literally incapable of understanding what I am saying or what you are saying. And I don't mean they resist. I mean that trauma is very often a protective mechanism that a child that just automatically engages to protect children from whatever it may be. And this protects the child as it protects all mammals. Mammals very often, non-human mammals, find a way to shake off that trauma and be open to new experiences later. Humans very often multiply the trauma and increase the trauma, and they become impermeable to new ideas or any ideas that might reawaken the trauma. So it is almost impossible for a Western European politician, for example, to have in his brain the notion that we must degrow, because that is massively traumatic from the point of view of his entire belief system. This is not something that can get in there. And it's not that he's a hypocrite, it's not that he's a fool, it's that he's not capable of doing it. So much of my own thinking recently has been around you know, my own history of trauma, how the people I'm talking to are managing, are not coping. I'll give you a funny story. I was involved in the recent G7 US and Canadian summits that happened in Brussels. I look after our digital relationships with Canada, and I was spending my time, you know, as my official job, writing conclusions to the summit about you know, things digital, all the while desperately trying to get somebody to take on board the fact that there is only one issue at the moment, and it is the survival or the comfortable extinction of our species over the coming 10 to 20 years. And it is incredible to me that it is almost impossible to put anything into the summit conclusions that have any meaning whatsoever, or that are not perfectly juxtapositioned with their complete antithesis. So we will and Canada and the United States believe in our true and everlasting friendship, and we must increase trade and blah, blah, blah. We must also work on the green agenda, and we are committed to reaching Paris and global. It is complete, total schizophrenia. It is an astonishing state. And it's only when you step back and you look through the eyes of somebody who has become aware of your own trauma, and you say, wow, these guys cannot hear this. My own bosses, as I write this stuff, are sort of saying, now we have to put something in about ICTs improving growth. Why? What do you want to improve? What do you want? How many more planes and ships do you need? Do you really want the Canadians to continue burning 5 tons of sand to make 1 ton of oil? Do we really need to make hundreds and thousands of German cars every day to ship to Canada? And then somewhere in there, put something in about green. Okay, leprechauns are green. Don't be a smart ass, Doyle. Okay, well, what do you want me to say? But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that a newfound empathy for that. I used to think they were just morons. Give me a machine gun, I'll take them out. We'll put intelligent people in. What problem? But it's not. That's not the way it works. It is deeply, deeply traumatized people, utterly incapable of absorbing what's in front of them or appreciating the beauty of life as it is.
What was the film? You mentioned the author, but
It's called The Wisdom of Trauma. And it's a simply extraordinary thing. There was a special event for those of us who are kind of really into this over the 2 weeks ago. It lasted a full week. So there was a special screening of the movie on the internet. And then there was a series of interviews with all sorts of famous and wonderful people talking about the trauma. It is an extraordinary experience. I think this is definitely where I'm going to spend my time working, well, whatever time is left to me. So I think it's, the group that you have in front of you. The group that organizes are a group called SAND. So it's science and non-duality. It's an extraordinary group who have worked for years on kind of consciousness studies as well as deep physical theories and so on and so forth. So you could probably get in touch with this group, SAND, and arrange for a screening and a viewing of the workshops. It is something that is, it's life-changing. And it's, I'd say 18 months ago, I knew I stopped shouting at people for a reason. 18 days ago, I finally figured out the reason. So
better late than never.
Yeah. Well, I'm interesting and I'm entertaining. I'm not necessarily that smart.
So I understand, even if you write these more radical ideas, then the other officials are canceling you out, basically.
It's not a question of cancelling out. It's a question of being incapable of understanding it. It's another story. If my sister ever sees this, she'll go completely crazy. But never mind. My mother was died a couple of years ago, and she was suffering from arthritis and all sorts of things. And she was in a wheelchair and very bent. Double, and my younger sister looked after her for many years, and she had wanted to go on and do a couple of weeks on the Camino de Santiago, find herself, big walk, whatever. But my mother was going downhill pretty fast, but she insisted that my sister go. Which was great. And then she said, and I want John to come and look after me. So I have 2 other brothers, 2 other sisters, and she wanted me. In one way, I was hugely honored. I have no idea why she picked me. I went over and I spent 2 weeks with my mother, which was wonderful. But at one stage, my sister, and get this, my sister is, well, she's just retired, but she's a consultant psychiatrist. So somebody who should know about people, so my sister arrived in a state of high excitement at the door. And she ran in and said, ma'am, I've got them. And my poor confused mother sort of said, got what? The moon boots from Australia. The moon boots from Australia. So these are a special kind of big woolly boots that kids sometimes wear to clomp around, Okay, moon boots from Australia. So, you're going to love them. Because she couldn't get the right moon boot. I don't know, it wasn't made of kangaroo fur or something anywhere else. So she gets down on her knees and she removes my mother's shoes. And my mother was in agony with arthritis at this stage. And then pulls these ridiculous kind of fashionable moon boots onto my mother's feet and says, now, isn't that wonderful? And my mother said, oh, thank you so much. And kind of looking at me. And so eventually my sister was always terribly busy, rushed out the door to a next job. And my mother looked up at me and said, John, I said, yes, could you take these fucking things off my feet, please? And now, my sister is a consultant psychiatrist. Logically, she knows my mother is a couple of weeks from death. She knows she's never actually going to stand again. She knows it is agony putting these things on. It's just a spec, and I'm sitting there. Wow, it's so amazing. Now, in the same way, you look at writing the summit conclusions, and we will be terribly concerned about e-identities and fair harbor or safe harbor for data, and we will make sure that artificial intelligence is developed in a human-centric form. Like, this is lunacy. It doesn't mean anything. It's like dogs yapping at a passing car, or lots of dogs yapping at lots of passing cars. Instead of kind of going, okay, Can everybody just chill for a moment, right? Okay, are we capable of absorbing what's actually happening in our world? Canada, the country for which I'm responsible, the European Union, amongst the top 7 massive polluters in the world. Climate change is going off a cliff, like shouldn't have happened according to the IPCC till 2100, but myself and lots of the people that I work with knew very well the timescales that this was going to happen in. Surely the only thing we need to be talking about is how we address this as societies, as human beings, how we even begin to admit that it's happening to ourselves. But, and I don't know how we get there. I suspect it's through the sort of work that you're doing with these sort of weekends or these sort of 2 or 3 or 4 day retreats. Getting to a place where you can find a tribe of people with whom you're comfortable and with whom you can exchange much more than empty words. So that's really what interests me now, rather than sort of saying, you know, and is the European Commission moving in the right direction? No. Is anyone officially moving in the right direction? No. Why aren't they? They're not capable of absorbing the real facts. And this goes for scientists as well. You will read most of the scientific papers that you will read will have some extraordinary kind of conclusions in them, such as in the last 14 years, the total amount of heat being retained within the atmosphere is twice what it was 14 years ago. You know, we can work at watts per square meter. Or Jim Hansen will write something like, you know, the original Charney sensitivity was totally erroneous. It won't be 3 degrees, it'll be 10 degrees. And then, so they'll write this extraordinary stuff and then conclude, so it is high time we began to think about making emissions cuts. What? That's a bit like saying to my mother, it's about time we got Usain Bolt's trainer to teach you how to walk again. It's not gonna happen. You know, and this is the way, and I'm fascinated by this is the way damaged humans are. And we're all damaged. And I think a lot of what, you know, the short period we get on this earth is to try and find that damage, open that, you know, heal those wounds enough so that we can open it and begin to hear each other again. Then maybe stuff happens.
On that note, does anybody have a question that we can hear?
Well, the obvious question.
You can come closer.
Like you said, the obvious question is how do we get the politicians and the leaders of the society to actually absorb those facts and start acting? What do you do?
I mean, this is a really, really good question, and I will answer it as follows. There's a small number of people from that huge list that I still meet up with. We go for a drink and have a laugh. So somebody arranged a drink the other day. My friend Anna Olsen, you might have met Anna, she's Swedish. But Anna and Bernard Fries and a couple of other people. So we got together in the park as it's slow loosening of the old COVID restrictions. And there were about 5 people there. And one guy wasn't there. Now, just in case you might ever see this, I'm not going to mention his name. And he is a very irritating German. I mean, there's a lot of irritating Germans, let's be honest. But this guy, must be my way, we have to do it this way, now we will do this, and I've written this, and now, and it is debilitating and exhausting. And whoever was in charge of doing the inviting just said, fuck it, I'd rather enjoy a couple of drinks rather than having to put up with this. Now this is 5 people utterly committed to a climate agenda, and we even exclude one of us. Yeah, and so I'm going to say what we should do to those other people. And I was there, and I'd spent all week thinking we should invite him, because it wasn't me who was doing the invitation. And then when I was there, I got really upset and I got annoyed with the other people because I hadn't invited them. And they sort of said, well, why didn't you invite? And what was really interesting was I realized again that somehow in all our communications, we had failed to connect as humans. We managed to connect as you know, that part of us which is the rational the rational, in the sense of working out ratios, the rational mind. So we had managed to connect in that way, and we knew we were right, and we had all the figures. But even amongst ourselves, even amongst a group of 5 people theoretically on the same wavelength, there was still a split and a schism. So in answer to the question that the gentleman put about, how do we get them to listen? Now, my new question to myself is, one, what am I actually feeling? Because as an Irish male of a certain age, I think a lot of my upbringing even prevented me from actually knowing what I'm feeling, even knowing what I'm feeling. So what am I feeling? What am I needing? And what's going on with that person? Genuinely, what's going on with that person? Not what he's saying, not even what he's doing, but what's going on. And unfortunately, that's about as far as I've gotten at the moment. And I'd love to say I'm organizing a huge, big protest march, and we're all going to walk naked down the Rue de la Loi in Bruxelles and sort of say, be yourselves and we'll all understand. But unfortunately, that's about as far as I've got, having tried every other avenue, to be fair. So, yeah.
Well, my answer to this would be that the topic is so huge and you can only talk about it for a limited time, and then you're out of breath yourself as well. I know that I talk with some of my friends. We can talk about these very deep topics for 2 hours and then we have to stop. Yeah. Because we get annoyed with ourselves, not even other people. You just get annoyed with yourself. So, but maybe that's one question. I know you work with all the scientists, and I also have seen videos with you on the topics of deep adaptation, or people who represent this field. We haven't talked about it here in this summer camp, but maybe you can have your thoughts about this. But the idea is that what you do when the obvious solutions don't seem to work.
I think a very important option to keep open is the option of completely giving up and admitting defeat. I know that sounds a little bit odd, but it's the first rule of engineering, that I'm an engineer, the cause of most problems are solutions. So whatever solved your previous problem is the one that's caused the fuck up now. So you dam the Nile, woo, whoa, and then all of a sudden the silt builds up at the delta and you can't bring the ships in anymore. So there's always this issue. The primary cause of all problems are previous solutions, which is why the North American Indians had this wonderful impact assessment approach, which was, you must consider any action in terms of the 7th generation. So the 7th generation from where you are now is what you had to bring to the forefront of your thinking. That 7th generation, for them, a generation was 100 years as well. So that's what I call an impact assessment. I was thinking about this recently, and well, I always think about this, but giving up, the importance of giving up, the importance of admitting that you no longer have agency. Oh, I can see those mozzies are definitely driving you guys crazy. I have no mosquitoes here. It's just cool. So anyway, there's a wonderful poem by a Sufi poet called Lala, and she lived in Kashmir, and it roughly goes, "Oh Lord, I have wandered so far in search of you, and it was only when I gave up and turned around that there you were all the time, right beside me." In the same way, if you're of a Christian heritage, the last words that the Christ uttered were, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In other words, he had given up, he died, over. Zen Buddhism is all about understanding our total and complete lack of agency, and yet being part of what is unfolding. The Tao Te Ching, same thing. So one of the things that I'm interested in doing is exploring the unthinkable. And the unthinkable for me, certainly for the political classes with whom I work, is that we admit that we are completely powerless over what's going to happen next. It's a bit like actually the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 steps. The first step is I admitted I was powerless over alcohol and handed it over to a higher power, whatever that is. I have reached the point where I am 100% certain scientifically that there will be no humans on this earth in 20 years. None. Most of you will be dead within 10. I am utterly certain of that in terms of scientifically. I'm not going to go into all the details and so on and so forth, but there isn't going to be a human being left on this planet in 20 years. Now, what's interesting about that is that people then say to me, and is there anything we can do? There's absolutely nothing we can do about that. The systems that have been triggered are way bigger than any of our capacities to intervene. Like there's no possibility for us to refreeze the Arctic Ocean ice. That's not a possibility. Once that ice is finally gone and we lose the latent heat absorption capacity, just the disappearance of that ice alone is the equivalent of all the CO2 we have ever put into the Earth system, ever, since man stood upright. Just that on its own. I'm ignoring methane. I'm ignoring lots and lots of other things. So what's interesting to me now is if I can get at least some part of this group, or some part of the people with some part within everybody's heart, to admit that that is at least a possibility. And as I say, in my opinion, it is an absolute certainty. But if I can get people to admit that, then your perspective changes radically. So people will always say to me, well, if there's nothing we can do, I mean, well, there's nothing we can do. And I always say, no, there's nothing you can do about it. And therefore, everything remains to be done. Everything you have ever wanted or wished to do, you better start doing. Everything that you need to experience or feel or share is now, you're right up against the wall. This is it. I've been lucky enough or unlucky enough to be in the company of quite a few dying people one way and another. And the change in perspective is extraordinary. And now you might say, okay, that'll be nice. So we'll all have a different perspective when we fry. But my point is that that is a scientific assessment that I give. And that's, certainly this, bipedal 2-meter hominid will not be around within 20 years. But what does that mean? Where did we come from in the first place? What is your understanding of what life meant anyway? How have you arrived at a world where the likes of Donald Trump and those 7 unfortunate, twisted, sad people representing our nations at the G7, those poor, screwed up, physically tortured people, what is so extraordinary about this being preserved? We know that this is a universe that seems to produce people and plants. It'll do it again.
I see already from people's faces, some people have the face of trying to unsubscribe from the list that you're not even on. And I did warn that there's alternatives to enjoy the nice weather, but I want to, but you can't escape this information. It's already out there that it is an actual possibility that the climate system is way more fucked than we think. But let's say it's not totally fucked. And then you have talked about these very local ways of life, and what I like most about it is like the last line you have always in these slides is that this is how most people live today, and most people lived like in the 50s, or you lived in the not so recent past. So what we talk today about degrowth is actually like just it's not so utopic. It's been around, but it is around everywhere else except for like very advanced nations.
The only thing I would say about that is it's extraordinarily difficult, purely scientifically, to see that this plague of humans can survive what is coming or what's here already. I say we're busily lying to ourselves that we're not yet at 1.5 degrees. We're at 2.3 degrees already. They moved the baseline. Like the IPCC moved the baseline. Like this is what humans do. Like you can't face the truth. So, okay, we need to keep it. Do you know what the current baseline is? Something like it's based between a kind of the beginning of the 20th century up to about 1960. That's the baseline. Everybody thinks it was pre-industrial, which it was, but they just change it. So it's fine. We've moved the baseline. Okay. So one of the things I would say is, degrowth is interesting, and I would definitely have been a major proponent of it in about 1980 when Jimmy Carter was the president. The only engineer who was ever president of the United States, I might just point that out, had solar panels on the roof of the White House. And anyway, but the size of the shocks that are going to happen to our system are so enormous that it's terribly difficult to make any intelligent plans. For example, you might sort of say to Irish people, well, ask your father how he grew potatoes. But the climate is changing so extraordinarily that it might be bamboo that we should be growing. Like, it's impossible to imagine how you would reforest Ireland, for example, proactively. You just have to leave it alone. Yeah, and that's something that human beings are very bad at. And that's part of what I'm really interested in doing, trying to get to the point where we admit our complete lack of agency. Like, we are literally fleas on a dog's back arguing about which ear we should shout into to tell him to go left or right. The dog ain't listening anyway. The dog is going to do what the dog is going to do. So part of what worries me about making explicit preparations is sort of people get carried away with, oh, I need an independent energy system, or I need this, we need to grow this type of food. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I do believe in that. But I think the deeper thing is to start connecting as humans. I think that's really important. I think the thing that happened in our office when we met, when we sort of said, I didn't decide another pain in the arse Scandinavian student, fucking hell, and you didn't say another pompous, it was a connection that mattered, that's still here. And I would always hope to be a part of your tribe and you a part of mine in some way that, and that kind of a connection may mean more than most other connections. The difference between the care that my younger sister gave my mother for so many years and my incredibly busy psychoanalyst elder sister rushing in with moon boots at the last minute and sort of saying, you always wanted these. I think my mother mentioned them 30 years previously. So degrowth. Degrowth, and it's about connection. I think it's about connections, and they have to be those real connections. And if I leave you with one thought, it is a thought that it's not that there's nothing we can do about it. Everything is left to do. Everything is left to do. And all I've spoken to you about is science. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friends. It was absolutely wonderful, as always. Well done, Madis. Well done, folks. Thank you so much.